the 80-20 rule comes into play. I mean, for me, it might have even been like 90-10, because it was like most of the things I tried did not work, but the things that did work were what brought me to the next level.
Welcome to Self-Made and Sober. I'm your host, Andrew Lassis with selfmade-coaching.com. And in this podcast, it's my job to interview people who are not only crushing it in business, but have also struggled with addiction in the past and are in long-term recovery. Be sure to join our Facebook group where we help entrepreneurs grow and scale their business at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoy the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show afterwards so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode. Welcome to the Self-Made and Sober podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lassis, and with me today is the fitness recovery expert, Chris Scott. He's written a book called Drinking Sucks, which I think is the perfect title for anything recovery related when you get down and blunt like that. He's got a podcast called Elevation Recovery, which is absolutely incredible. Definitely be sure to check that out. His website's Fit Recovery. Chris is an awesome person with so much to offer. I'm so happy to have you on the show. Chris, how are you doing?
Andrew, thank you. That's a very generous introduction. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, so you've been sober since 2014, but I know your date is kind of an amorphous mid-2014. So why don't you give us a little explanation on what's mid-2014 looking like for you?
That's correct. So 2014 was generally a blur. And in retrospect, I can generally connect the dots of what happened going back to most of 2015. But I had really had a series of events that made me realize that it was necessary for me to finally quit drinking. I had had a long, slow buildup to the point where I was drinking a handle of vodka each day, like clockwork. And I got to the point where I couldn't go 2 hours without drinking. Even in the middle of the night, I remember getting up once and having to chug a bottle of bitters just to keep the withdrawal symptoms at bay. And, to make a long story short, I'd had dozens or hundreds of failed attempts, some successful tapers, tapering down from a fifth to half a fifth to a bottle of wine, then some beers, and then getting off. I'd make it about a week, and then someone would throw a party. I remember going to a wonderful couple's house. They had been engaged, and I had been alcohol-free for 5 days, and I brought a 6-pack of root beer. And of course, I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, so they thought I was being silly. And they literally took the 6-pack out of my hand, replaced it with a bunch of Bud Lights, and that was it. I was on a bender for the next couple months, basically. So I had gotten sick of it. Unfortunately, I waited so long that I needed to have professional help detoxing off of alcohol. I'd had some hallucinations, probably seizures. I didn't know, what they were, and I don't want to self-diagnose, but it was likely I was getting to that end stage of alcohol addiction. And so I just showed up basically on a treatment center's door and said, this is it, I give up. And I told my closest family members and friends, and they were all super supportive. And that's really, even though things were blurry for a while after that, that was the turning point for me.
Yeah, that mentality of surrender to win. And that's one of the things that one of my mentors in 12 Steps, he had instilled in me early on, is that you don't have to keep fighting this thing over and over and over. Like when you give up, there is power in giving up. And I think, society, it's like, never give up, never stop fighting, always keep fighting. It's like, I'm not getting any better by doing this. My life is continuing to get worse. So how did you juggle the, I want to take control of the situation and the idea of just giving up? What's going through your head?
I had to be compassionate to myself until I got to the point where I could fight for things that were worthy of fighting for. Fighting against a alcohol addiction, whether you believe it's a permanent spiritual disease or a coping mechanism for trauma or a physical addiction or a neural pathway or a biochemical imbalance, you're not going to win. And in early recovery, I think that surrender mentality is necessary. And it can be kind of cathartic to stop fighting, as they say. And I had a interesting conversation with an MD who treats people with alcohol addiction recently, and he said the reason why you feel so bad, so defeated, at least one of them in early recovery, is that you have these inflammatory cytokines flowing through your body, and you essentially have the same immune response that you would get when you have the flu. And what good is it to try to fight the flu? Like, everyone knows that if you have the flu, the last thing you want to do is go to the gym for 3 hours and try to beat it. Maybe a light sweat would help. But so I think it really is good to frame it as an illness in the short term, to treat yourself in the same way that you would treat someone in your close family or circle of friends if they were really sick. And then you can build yourself back up from there. And when you start regaining the mental clarity to articulate goals for yourself that are worth pursuing, then you can get back into warrior mode. And that's kind of what I did. It took me months to get back into warrior mode.
And what are your thoughts on the alcohol is a disease versus alcohol is, it's a matter of willpower, alcoholism, not alcohol. It's a matter of willpower. Like, why can't this guy just chill? What's your thoughts on that? The disease and self-control.
Yeah, this is one of the hardest questions. And I think it would be arrogant for me to present the end-all be-all answer for this question. But I have done a good amount of thinking, and I've come to the conclusion that, first of all, alcohol addiction is as complex as people are. And it's as complex as human nature itself, and as complex as our biochemistry. We still don't totally understand human nature or our biochemistry. We know that alcohol addiction, by definition, intertwines itself into our brains, into our biochemical balance or lack thereof, into our identities, into our emotional lives, our social attachments, our spiritual identity. So you can't really answer that question without having a definitive answer to what exactly is going on in all of those places. What I found to be more helpful, and I should say, I don't view alcohol addiction as a disease per se. I see it as a neural pathway that's really stubborn, that's grown strong like an oak, combined with biochemical imbalances, combined with whatever else may be going on in a person's life. But, I wanted to say, what's more important than the disease label or not having a disease label is that you find a way to frame your narrative that works for you. And for me, it's helpful to view my addiction as a phase of my life and alcohol as an exhausted resource, rather than to frame this as a perpetual ongoing journey. I watched an interview with a famous actor from the 70s, maybe I think it's Richard Burton, maybe. He's very charismatic, but he framed his alcohol addiction as a lifelong boxing match in which he could be knocked out with no advance notice at any time. And I thought, if I had framed my condition, we'll call it, in that way, I don't think I would have made it out of early recovery, because I would have thrown my hands up and said, what's the point? So I think it's more important than the labels we decide to acquiesce in for ourselves that are thrown at us from doctors. And obviously the medical establishment sees alcohol addiction as a disease. I think what's more important is the way we frame our own personal journey and finding something that works, whether it's in that biochemical arena or psychologically, socially, spiritually. I think those are the main pillars that are important to address. And once you find something that works and you start feeling better, then who cares what it was? It's all semantics at that point.
I love that you look more at the results and not so much at this is what it's supposed to be. Like, it's no secret in my life, I'm a big I have an affinity towards 12-step recovery. And at the same time, I know that that's not the only way. And there's plenty of people who have been introduced to it, said they didn't like it, and then tried something different. And, who am I to say you're not actually happy because you're not practicing the 12 steps in your daily life? But a lot of people have that mindset of like, it is this way or else you are wrong. And if you think you're happy, you're lying to yourself. And everybody should be doing 12-step recovery. I believe there's an ounce of truth to it, but I've come to the realization that there are a lot of different ways that you can get sober. And if at the end of the day, we're all fighting the same battle and all want the same result, I don't think that the many the micro in between of what you do on your day to day, whether what you do works for you and what I do works for me. If we're fighting the same battle and winning the same war, I don't think that it matters as much. I think if you're going to do it, you should do it and not have one foot in, one foot out. But what does success look like for you in your day to day for staying sober?
Well, first of all, I think I just want to say I think it's really awesome that you have that mindset, because it's almost, we live in an increasingly polarized society in many different ways. It's like, the vegans can't talk to the carnivores and the liberals can't talk to the conservatives. And now, like, in this niche, I guess, or in this place of recovery, digital recovery, I would call it, the last thing I would want to see is for it to devolve into a war between AA people and non-AA people. I think that, having a compassionate view of everyone's journey is the ideal. But to answer your question, on a day-to-day basis, my life now is totally unrecognizable from anything that I thought would have been possible when I quit drinking. And I guess, in AA, they call that the promises, of sobriety. And it's surreal. It feels like I stepped into an alternate universe. My life isn't perfect. It's not all roses and unicorns and rainbows, but the amount of mental clarity I have compared to before, the ease with which I do things that used to be really, really hard. One of the hallmarks of my early recovery was that getting out of bed was hard for like months. And for me, my thing was I discovered supplementation, I discovered diet changes, and those were the things that I thought should be universal for everyone, until I developed a more nuanced version of my belief system and more open-minded, as we said. But, I think it's relevant for me to mention the supplementation and the holistic emphasis, because once I started doing those things, that's when my day-to-day life, I started being able to more easily integrate things that were good for me long-term, and to switch my dopamine attachment from short-term escapism via alcohol to long-term fulfillment and joy. So there's a difference between pleasure and happiness, and something clicked in my brain at some point, and I was able to start doing those things. Going to the gym was no longer a chore or an obligation. Starting a business was no longer some elusive dream that some lucky people got to do that I would never be able to do because I was stuck. I was a corporate slave. That's how I framed it, working in finance at the time, and often being asked at 6 p.m. to stay overnight and work on a financial model. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, I have the gym. I'm always thinking about how to improve, optimize my life holistically. I've kind of latched onto the term biohacker, which is silly but fun. But I also get a tremendous amount of fulfillment out of helping people going through a similar journey, and especially people in early recovery. I have hundreds of people in my online course, and I spend 1 to 2 hours every morning responding to people. Typically, I'd say 6 days a week. I'm in there first thing in the morning, and it makes me grateful that I have been able to get to the place that I've gotten to, because I can help people. And obviously I don't have all the answers, but, I have fulfillment on a daily basis. And, I have connections with people in my community that I didn't have. I look forward to seeing the manager at my favorite Indian restaurant. I have a weird spicy food obsession. I love seeing the people that I do yoga with, even though I'm not like close friends with them. But, it's night and day, from isolating myself in alcohol addiction to having fulfillment, health, and also connections with people that I didn't have before because I never really looked for them.
And now that you have your eyes open to connections, do you have any examples maybe that stand out, other than obviously the guy at the Indian restaurant, which I can relate to? We have a guy over here. He's like a Indian version of Bart Simpson, not a poo, but like an Indian Bart Simpson.
That's awesome.
What he looks like is kind of funny. But do you have any examples of where that maybe in the past you would have taken a certain direction with a relationship with someone, and then in this new phase of your life with different outlook, you took a different journey, and how that played out? Are there any examples that come to mind?
Well, I should say first that I was really lucky to have a solid group of core friends when I quit drinking. And this kind of defies maybe common experience or so I'm not sure how many people would relate to this, but these guys were my drinking buddies in college, but they were also like my brothers, and they were the first people to be there for me. If I had tried to order a drink 3 months after I quit drinking at a restaurant or something when I was out with them, they would have physically interfered and said, "No, you're not doing that. We care about you." So I think it's good to, I have to mention that I had those confidants. I had that support network. But beyond that, yeah, I think I had, when I worked in finance and I drank pretty much every night, it was like the opportunity cost of doing that was not developing deep connections with people. And now it doesn't seem like a burden to develop a relationship or a friendship with someone. I moved to a different city since I quit drinking. It's about 5 years ago. I was in Atlanta when I quit, and I've since moved to a different city, and a little bit smaller. But I met a great guy about a year ago. We became workout buddies, and it's kind of a funny golf course type community that we live in. There are a lot of older people. Everyone's super nice, but I didn't expect to meet someone I could work out with, in his 30s or whatever. And we developed this Saturday routine, which is like yoga, Indian food. Then we head back to the gym, sauna or steam room, hot tub. Then we go back to our respective houses and take naps. But he's what we would call a social drinker, but he's eaten up my material. And it's a huge ego boost for me, probably unjustified, but he has a copy of Drinking Sucks. He says he drinks less because of it now, and he feels better. I got him into CBD, which is something that I've probably controversial, but something that helps me in my daily routine. And so there's and obviously I've gotten a lot out of our relationship as well. And, just having someone to talk about who has an interesting life experience too, that kind of thing would not have happened had I not quit drinking. And it's amazing the connections once you realize that quitting drinking allows you to be more present in all areas of life. After 5 years, you can look back and count tens or dozens of connections that you just wouldn't have. You wouldn't know those people. You would walk by them on the street, they would be strangers, and you would still be feeling alone. Whereas, now, because of the way things have turned out, however your recovery program has been, you get to have that much more warmth in the world, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you anymore. And I want to jump around a little bit. So you were working in finance. Was there a moment where you decided I need to go into entrepreneurship? What's that looking like in your life?
That was a very slow decision for me because I had left a somewhat glamorous finance job in New York to briefly be a business manager for a tech company, which was not the path for me. I quickly realized that. And then I ended up back in the traditional, not quite as glamorous as New York, but finance route. And everyone was super nice. I was in Atlanta. And there was a spiritual yearning for more. It was totally amorphous. I couldn't really quantify it or qualify it. All I knew was that I wasn't happy and that alcohol was better, or it seemed better to me at the time than my day-to-day life, which was boring to me. And then I felt guilty because I knew there were people who would still kill for my job. And how arrogant of me to not enjoy something that other people would kill for. So there was some guilt and some shame there as well. Now, by the time I quit, things had gotten pretty bad. Alcohol hadn't really affected my work performance until the end. But when it did, it did. And I ultimately quit because I should say it was a mutual decision. I missed 3 days of work in a row, which is unacceptable. That's when I ended up in treatment. Had a phone call with my boss at the time, probably a week or two into treatment, still hazy memory, in which I was hoping when he called me that he would tell me that I wasn't invited back. And that's exactly what happened. And, honestly, I think since then the stigma has disappeared a little bit. But then that's when my journey toward entrepreneurship started, because I had no idea what I was going to do. I just felt relief. I felt there was uncertainty, but it was combined with a kind of cathartic relief. Like, yes, now I'm done with the alcohol. I have people who are my confidants and support network who can buffer me against alcohol, and I'm done with that career. And now, I could have framed it as now it's a terrifying journey to see how I screw up my life next. But I decided to frame it as now I get to be whoever the hell I want to be. And that was more exciting. So I decided, well, what am I good at? Fitness. I'd always loved working out. Alcohol had shipped into that, but I decided I would do it. One of the luxuries of being a trainer is you get to be in the gym all day. So I knew I wouldn't lose that aspect of recovery, which was already helping me even before I learned about supplements and other strategies. And so eventually the fitness, to make a very long story short, morphed into the website. And I was still helping people one-on-one, for free at first. And then that turned into the business of fit recovery. But I was a trainer for a couple years before that happened.
And what was the real jumping off point where you saw fit recovery? Maybe I'm just projecting my experience, but I had kind of the side hustle thing going on. And then there were a couple watershed moments that were just like, this isn't just Andrew in his living room on a computer helping people out. Like, this is actually a real thing. Did you have any moments that stand out as far as when fit recovery changed from a kind of fun idea to a real thing?
Yes. And, I almost gave up on fit recovery several times because my strategy had been to just write as many articles as possible and hope that Google would see how good they were. And that was a bad strategy. So I'd gone through, I did that. Then I wrote an ebook. I got a sale after 3 weeks and I was ecstatic. And I realized it was my uncle. My mom had told him about it. So, I had that. And then I started getting smart. I learned about how to write SEO articles, which I don't think is a good strategy anymore because it's so saturated. But at the time it was when that traffic started slowly building, going from 200 visitors a week to, 2,000 and more and more. And at one point getting up to around 100,000 people just from Google in a month. That was when I realized things are going well and I can not just liberate myself from the grind of training, which, now I had just framed that as an exciting thing and it was exciting for a while, but, after a while my joints started to hurt and I didn't want to be in there all day, like moving stuff around. And I loved helping people, but I wanted to scale it. And I wanted to increase the magnitude with which I reached people, which I could do more effectively with alcohol recovery than helping someone lose 5 pounds or whatever. So yeah, it was really seeing that momentum build from the strategies that I implemented and seeing that there was a direct connection between the ones that worked and the results. And realizing also that the 80-20 rule comes into play. I mean, for me, it might have even been like 90-10, because it was like most of the things I tried did not work, but the things that did work were what brought me to the next level. And that was really encouraging. So yeah, I would say it was just a slow process of organic growth, but every now and then there was like a glimmer of potential.
And so if we fast forward a little bit, tell us a little bit about Elevation Recovery, your podcast.
So Elevation Recovery is actually the culmination of my friendship and alliance with a guy named Matt Finch, who's an awesome guy. He runs a website called opiateaddictionsupport.com. And we found each other online, actually, when I was in the process of building Fit Recovery. And he had done his website he had started it several years before mine. I think at this point, he's like 8 or 9 years free from opiates. And he had been addicted to alcohol before that. So he was a bit ahead of the path that I was on. And, so we really helped each other. I did a guest post on his website. He did some on mine to help my website rank a little better. He had better domain ranking than I did. And he was just tremendously helpful in all sorts of ways. I didn't know much about marketing at the time, so he helped me with that. And we just became really good friends. And we would have these mastermind calls like once a month and talk about business and what we were doing, any new courses we were making, what we were excited about doing. And those mastermind calls eventually morphed into the podcast. And so some of our episodes are basically identical to what our old masterminds used to be, just talking about something usually I'm the rapid machine gun style talker, and he's more slow and collected and calm. So hopefully that contrast works out and isn't too confusing for people. But I feel like we have a good vibe, and we also take turns interviewing experts in their niches in anything pertinent to alcohol recovery, and also other people's recovery stories. So the podcast is it's yet another way that we're experimenting with to try to reach more people. And it's been a lot of fun so far.
You had touched on earlier, and I'd like to come back to this about supplements. Do you have any recommendations as far as supplements go, for be it in recovery or for people that are trying to get? I know the answer. It's a super generic question to a very, very niched. It depends on your circumstances. But is there any kind of general rule of thumb that you would give to just someone on the street says, name one or two?
Right. So because everyone is biochemically unique, as you said, that's the disclaimer. Some people are on antidepressants and they shouldn't take certain amino acids, so the medications and all that. And then obviously I'm not a doctor and or a naturopath, but I can tell you what helped me and a few that have helped a lot of people. Now, obviously, B vitamin, or I shouldn't say obviously, but B vitamins are very important for alcohol recovery. And if you end up in the hospital with severe withdrawals, they're going to give you an injection of vitamin B1, which is thiamine, a deficiency in which can cause wet brain, which is a pretty serious condition and sometimes not reversible. But what I found was that that's just the tip of the iceberg. Vitamins and minerals are very important. Magnesium was really helpful for me. I found that most people tend to be deficient in magnesium. It's possibly depleted from our soil. People aren't eating enough leafy greens. You can get magnesium from oral tablets. Magnesium citrate, magnesium threonate are good options. You want to avoid magnesium oxide because it doesn't absorb well. Epsom salt baths are a decent way to get magnesium, but one drink increases the body's excretion of magnesium by like 70% or 90%. It's insane. And most people are deficient anyway. And it's involved in 300 bodily processes. So, you can imagine the cascade of effects that happens when you introduce a mineral that you just need for basic functioning. Your baseline level of well-being goes up. And so that's just one example. Amino acids, I definitely want to mention as well. DLPA, there are a lot of funny names, but if you look into them, there's a lot of research behind them. DLPA, or DL-phenylalanine, contains precursors for endorphins and dopamine. L-tyrosine contains a dopamine precursor. 5-HTP or L-tryptophan are serotonin precursors. L-glutamine is commonly used in bodybuilding. And I stumbled upon that because I wanted to get back in shape and build muscle. But it turns out that it's also useful for alcohol cravings, for sugar cravings, for people with hypoglycemia, which is really common in recovery, and for repairing the gut lining and for helping the immune system. So those are just a few things, and obviously I found one of the heartening things about physical recovery from alcohol addiction is it seems to be the case that the same compounds and strategies that are helpful to help a normal person bring their life to the next level are helpful just in usually larger doses to get someone from feeling like total crap, no motivation, to feeling well enough to summon the physical energy required to work on whatever psychological or spiritual conundrums they're facing. And so that's why I think that this is consistent with 12-step. There are a lot of people who I talk to who go to AA, and we avoid any debates about the particular beliefs that I might personally have a difference with, and we just talk about, all right, well, how can restoring physical health help you on your spiritual journey, given your belief system and what you want to do. And usually it's pretty easy to answer, and we just start with some basic things, and it's a holistic process. So it's not all about supplements. It's about sleep. It's about getting to the gym and eating well, staying hydrated, reducing stress levels. So supplements are very important, but really that's the tip of the iceberg.
Awesome. Well, Chris, in wrapping up, What's one call to action that you have for the people listening to the show that can help them either in entrepreneurship, in being more successful, or something where someone's struggling with alcohol to take the next step? What would be your call to action to the audience?
My call to action would be something that, if I had heeded it, would have helped me succeed quicker and probably feel better quicker. And so, I mean, in both business and alcohol recovery, and that's to connect with people who are doing exactly what you want to do, who are where you want to be. And I'm sure that's been said before, but I mean, I would not be talking to you right now if I hadn't connected with Matt Finch a while back. I think I might have given up on fit recovery. Basic stuff that I needed to know years ago when I was building it, like how to optimize my email list or, do a lead magnet. He helped me with, he was my mentor. So, that's the business angle, but from a recovery angle as well, I ended up, it was a double gift, I guess you could say, because he also became a mentor, someone who he'd quit. It didn't matter to me that he'd quit opiates, but he had also started doing exactly what I wanted to do. And he was in recovery, or he had recovered. So it was, I would say that finding someone, identifying someone who is a role model, who's what you want to be, either in business or in alcohol recovery and beyond, is the best thing. Because alcohol, and I haven't been addicted to anything except alcohol, but I think addiction is a very confining state of existence, and it keeps you isolated, stuck in your head. If you stay stuck in your head for too long, you'll go crazy. You won't make progress. You might have delusions of grandeur. I've been there with all of those things. I was in some very strange mental places during my drinking years. And there was definitely an absence of connection that helped me after I quit drinking, once I resolved it.
Awesome. And that's great actionable advice. Find someone who has what you want and then just do what they do. It actually is that simple. And that's one of the foundations, 12-step recovery. You get a sponsor and they show you, this is how I live life. And this is how I do laundry. And this is how I stay faithful to my wife. And this is how I do just all these basic human functions. And a lot of us aren't capable or don't have experience in that. And so having a role model in that sense is absolutely incredible. And in business, my first year, we did practically nothing in sales compared to where we're at now. And it's like, if I went back in time 6 years ago and I said, hey, 6 years ago, Andrew, who thinks he knows everything, here is what you really should be doing. And do not waste your time on ABCD. Like you said, content marketing in your space is very, very, very competitive. And if you're not differentiating yourself from all the competition, you can be doing the exact thing that everybody else is doing, and people can know more than you, rank higher than you, and you're fighting a winless battle when on the other side, email marketing, building your list, having targeted marketing message, that's so much more effective, especially if you're building something where your brand is based on you and people know who you are and all these things. I think that's one of the greatest pieces of advice, not just in recovery, not just entrepreneurship, but just all around. Find somebody who has what you want and then just do what they do. Simple enough. But Chris, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you online?
Andrew, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. And people can find me at the Elevation Recovery podcast, which is available on iTunes and Spotify. And also you can go to elevationrecovery.com and check out our show. And if you'd like to find Fit Recovery, it is fit-recovery.com. That's my original website. And there you can learn more about my book, Drinking Sucks, an online course. And I have a bunch of free articles, several hundred free articles on all topics ranging from exercise to nutrition to psychological strategies. And, so that's about it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Guys, if you liked the show, be sure to rate and subscribe. Send either of us a message. If you have more questions about sobriety, about fitness, about whatever it is, send us a message. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, the whole gambit. We're here to help. And thank you so much, Chris. Have a great day.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to Self-Made and Sober. Be sure to join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoyed the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode.